Hi, this is Simma Lieberman, the Inclusionist. I help create inclusive work cultures where people love to do their best work and customers love to do business. And in the LGBTQ+++, I am an L for lesbian.
Hello, Al Bosses. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. And on this week's episode, I am really thrilled to introduce you all to Simma Lieberman. So Simma, welcome to the show. I'm really honored to have you here.
Well, I'll tell you, after our last conversation, I am so thrilled to be here, and I'm so glad to know you.
Awesome. So for folks who are not familiar with Simma's work, she is internationally known as the Inclusionist because she creates inclusive workplaces where employees love to do their best work and customers love to do business. She works with leaders of organizations who understand that while training in areas of diversity and inclusion is important, sustainable change only occurs when diversity and inclusion are integrated into the business strategy and are a part of the organization's cultural DNA. Simma is also the author of 110 Ways to Champion Diversity and Build Inclusion and Stress Management for the Motivated, a workbook for you. Okay, Simma, you're speaking my language. I enjoy talking with you when we're not podcasting. I am grateful that we are finally in the studio podcasting together. So I know a little bit about your story just because we're in the same kind of field, but I would love for you to share with our audience a little bit more about how you ended up being the Inclusionist. Like, how did you get started in this field? How did you get started in the work? Help us understand your origin story.
Okay, you may have to interrupt me because it's a long story because I've been on the earth a long time. But I began working in inclusion-related work, not as work, but as what I did when I was a teenager. I was born and raised in New York, in the Bronx, and I worked with a multicultural organization of Black, white, and brown people to bring people together across differences, and we would have big dialogues amongst people from different races and different cultures, and we set up free breakfast programs for school children, and we help people with housing issues. And so this is what I did as part of, hey, what do you do when you're not at work? And then later on, I had background. I got into the healthcare business. I was in healthcare in pain management, and I ended up doing workshops in wellness. And people said that they were hiring me because I could relate to their diverse population. So I thought, well, that's really cool. But I didn't know actually that there was even like a job or a business around diversity. Well, it wasn't called inclusion, but around diversity, until one day I was asked to work on on Yom Kippur, which was one of the holiest days of the Jewish calendar. And I said, no, I can't work on that day, but if you support diversity like you say you do, you'll change the day. Well, they didn't change the day. And then I was complaining to a friend of mine who was a senior leader at Apple. And at the time, believe it or not, Apple was on the cutting edge of diversity. And she said, well, I think you need to do diversity. Because I said, well, you know what? I want to do something where I could be as Jewish as I want to be.
Yeah.
And she said, well, you need to talk to Santiago Rodriguez, who's the head of diversity at Apple. And Apple had a head of diversity early on. I talked to him. He introduced me to a man named Rafael Gonzalez, who became my first mentor. And before that, though, right after I met Santiago, he also introduced me to Price Cobbs, who was one of the original people talking diversity in corporations. He's since passed away, but he was one of my early inspirations. And then I started meeting people and I started doing work. But actually, I was looking for a job. I really wanted a job. And I went to several interviews, and people weren't hiring me for jobs, but they hired me on a contract basis. And I really knew nothing about business. I mean, besides being when I was in healthcare, I was a practitioner. But before that, I was an hourly employee. That's what I was. I never thought I'd be anything but an hourly employee until I got into healthcare and wellness, and I didn't know anybody who owned a business The only person I knew who was salaried was my friend Kathy, the woman from Apple. I knew her socially, and I really didn't know anything about how you run businesses. I didn't even know what HR was. In fact, I remember going to a party and somebody said, "Oh, yeah, so you're doing wellness. Oh, you're doing diversity. Oh, so you're in HR." I didn't know what HR was, but I didn't want to act like I didn't know. I didn't want to look stupid. So I just said, yeah, you're right. Because you do OD, I go, oh, yeah, sure. I didn't know what that was either. And there was no internet, so I remember asking somebody, and I said, I really don't know what HR is.
Yeah.
And they told me what HR was, and I said, oh, okay, that sounds good. And it took me a while to get my business up and running because I still thought, well, somebody's going to hire me, but nobody hired me. And I had to learn about business. I really knew nothing about business, zero.
Thank you so much for sharing your background and how you got into the field. And I'm wondering, when you met Rafael Gonzalez, who you said was your mentor, right? How did that connection happen? It sounded like it happened through a friend. So, just kind of like walk us through, how did you first meet? And then talk to me a little bit about the role, like how important that relationship became to get mentored in the space and to see, before even getting started in business, to see that there was a real need, in which you kind of intuitively knew from your background. And when it comes to kind of corporate space, that like even today, there's so much more room to run. So talk to me a little bit more about that mentorship relationship.
Well, I actually, what I did was I read 3 books. I read one book about how to find a job in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it said you had to network. I didn't really know what networking was. So I read a book on networking. And then I read a book on communication. So what I did was they said, ask whoever you talk to, ask them for the names of 3 more people that you could talk to. And so after I met Santiago, and I didn't even know how you met people in corporate America, but I met him. He said, well, you need to talk to Price. So I call up Price, and Price said, well, because Price at the time was so well known. He said, well, how do you get your clients? How do you meet people other than just calling me? He said, I'm surprised that he had the courage to just pick up the phone and call me. And I remember saying, I'd call God if I thought it would move me ahead. And he started laughing, and I went in and I spent time with him, and he said, well, you need to talk. He gave me the names of like 4 or 5 different people, because I said, who else can I talk to? Because at the time, I was fearless. It wasn't until later on that I started having self-esteem issues and got afraid, realizing how important things were. But I was fearless. And I guess I should say that the group that I first started working with that got me interested in bringing people together, I was in a white group. We worked with the Black Panther Party, and we organized in white communities. They organized in black communities, and there was another group called the Young Lords. They organized in Puerto Rican communities. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started my whole perspective around people started expanding. And from then on, I was always in situations. I was always like in multicultural life situations. So diversity, doing work in diversity, fit with my work. And I thought, because I was a lesbian, I had issues around people with homophobia and not wanting to hire gay people. And also, my partner was African American. And sometimes we'd go to these business things, because I wanted to meet people, and everybody was white. And either they were white and they were very uncomfortable around people of color, we could tell, or they were homophobic. So one thing when I got into diversity, I thought, well, now I could really be myself. I could really be me. And I remember saying to my partner, oh, you got to come to this event with me. Well, that was not the case, because in the early days, and we're talking 30 years ago, in the early days of diversity, or almost 30 years ago, there were people who felt that LGBT people did not have a place at the diversity table. Mm-hmm. They thought race and, to some extent, gender, but LGBT was absolutely not included. And in fact, I went to a conference early on, and I remember Herman Cain, who was the head of the National Restaurant Association at one point, I don't know if you remember him, he ran for president, made a homophobic remark. And almost everybody except for me and two other people laughed. And then maybe, I don't know, 15 years later, the people who organized the conference, who were very homophobic, ended up becoming some of the strongest allies. So you never know.
Yeah.
But a lot of that happened because they knew people who they respected who were LGBT. But for me, I was very afraid because I needed to make a living, and I was very afraid. And for a while, I was closeted. I was very closeted because I wanted to be included. I wanted to work. I wanted people to bring me into their team because also at the time, people were getting very large training contracts and we were working in teams. And people would make homophobic jokes, and I am not the person I am now. I'm the same person, but I was afraid. And while I didn't pretend to be straight, I didn't come out. And that impacted my ability to do business at that time, because when you feel like you have to hide who you are, then you stop going. When people invite you to, for me, people inviting me to things, I didn't always go because I didn't want people to know what was really going on with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So not being me held me back.
Can you, Simma, can you let us know, like, this is like the early days of your business. So, like, give us a sense of, like, the time period that this was happening. And, like, when did you just step into you being the L, being a lesbian, a part of the rainbow family, and owning that? And how did that shift not only your business and kind of attracting the right people who you want to work with, but just yourself? Like, how did that feel for you?
So we're talking like 1990, and it wasn't until about maybe 1994, when I had my son, that I decided I'm not raising my son to be in the closet, because I saw other people who didn't talk to their children about being LGBT.
Yeah.
To whatever letters you were using at the time.
Yeah.
And I decided that I couldn't live not being who I am. Also, I had a partner.
Yeah.
You know, and by that time I've been with my partner for 10 years. My partner was African American, and she worked in a job where she couldn't be who she was. Mm-hmm. And we decided that that's not how we wanted to raise our son.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was more out. You know, I wasn't talking about it all the time, but I was much more out. And then, in fact, one day somebody said, because somebody who knew that I was a lesbian said to me, "Well, you know, you're a lesbian. Could you do a workshop on LGBT?" Now, I had never done a workshop on LGBT because I was afraid that people would then think, "Oh, she must be a lesbian, or she must be gay." And when they said, "Well, we'll pay you," I'm like, "Oh, yeah, sure, I could do it." And I called up one of my best friends who was a straight man. I said, "Hey, Gar, I'm going to do a workshop on LGBT. You've been doing it for a long time. What do I do?" Mm-hmm. And he helped me do it. Mm-hmm. And after that, then I just said, "You know what? They're going to pay me to do this. I'm out. And that's when I started, the whole mantra of, what was it? We're here, we're queer, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's what I would just start saying to myself.
Yeah. It's so interesting that, it's these moments in our life, like such a pivotal moment for you. 1994, you have your son, and that was a change. That was an important change. And, it reminds me of, my partner often says, she came out before Ellen, right? Clearly you did that, and in that moment,
yeah.
I think Ellen on TV, right? Was it 97 or yeah.
We knew about Ellen.
Yeah.
We knew about Whitney Houston. We knew about, the word, how those, the underground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But, at that time, I guess, like, my point is, like, you really were out there, in a way of that visibility. and the important role that plays, right? In using the Herman Miller example where, people in that room were laughing because they didn't know better. They didn't have relationships with LGBT people. They didn't know people like you or me. And it's easier to take a community of people and see them in the abstract and not see the humanity. And by virtue of you showing up, as scary as that was in '94, to say yes to doing a workshop on being LGBT at work, I mean, that you really put yourself out there in a way that by doing that, as scary as that probably felt then, you were able to change people's hearts and minds, or at least introduce something different than maybe what they were seeing on TV or in the media at that time.
I did.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, you paved the way for so many of us now doing this work. And I think that's important. The reason why I asked you to share the, just the time period is that, I mean, 1990, I feel like wasn't that long ago, although I'm sure there's some people listening to the show like, whoa, that was a long time ago. But, it wasn't that long ago. And we still have so much further to go when it comes to this work broadly. I mean, when we're talking about building belonging at work, trying to, help people who often feel like the workplace not only is a place where you don't belong, but it's pretty unsafe, right? And we still have so far to go. So this is, I think this is really interesting and helpful.
And in some places, it's still not. In some places, it's still not very safe at all. Mm-hmm. Because there's still places. I get calls every so often from people who are in the South, and they tell me that they're afraid. On the other hand, I met these two women from Cracker Barrel about 6 years ago who were married and in Mississippi, and they said that their managers at Cracker Barrel were really supportive. Mm-hmm. One thing too that I could share with you is that my partner died in 2003, and I still wasn't out. I mean, I was out, but I wasn't talking about it to everybody. Well, after she died, I wrote an article on what to do if one of your employees or somebody loses somebody. What do you say? And we wrote a newsletter, and in the newsletter, I said that the newsletter said Simma lost her partner, blah blah blah. Well, I was shocked at the outpouring of support that I got. Some of my most conservative, one guy was an ex-FBI agent. I mean, for some of my most conservative clients who read that newsletter and who said, "Thank you so much." One man said, "Well, my admin, her partner had breast cancer, and I didn't know what to say. And just reading your newsletter, now I feel so much more comfortable." So I was so glad that I shared that with people.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that, and I also think that for what you were going through at that moment, to have that outlet, as a newsletter and putting yourself out there, sharing something deeply painful as you're going through that grieving process, and to share so publicly your experiences, that's a human connection, regardless of the fact, whatever gender your partner is, right? That's a human connection. You lost someone who meant so much to you, deeply loved, right? And you were able to connect with people like that FBI agent. And in those moments, that's where the humanity is seen, right? That's where it's just I'm feeling what you're feeling because I'm going through this now with you. I mean, I think that's the power of this work, right? When you're able to make those kind of connections. And I mean, just the stories that you're sharing right now, it's clear why you do what you do because you're so good at it, and I really appreciate you sharing that. And I wanted to go back to something when you were talking about, when just getting started in this work, and you said, you didn't know that much about business or starting a business and all of that. And I mean, that's the whole reason why the show exists for me is I knew I needed mentorship when I got started as well. When for you did it start to feel like a business? When was it oh, not only am I doing this thing and I'm getting these contracts, but I have a business? What was that? When was that moment for you?
I got to tell you, it took a long time because people would say, "Oh, you have a business," and I'd say, "Yeah." But still, for me, it was just like, hey, can I make enough money to go through the month? That's all I want. And I was doing, I was working as a trainer, and I was subcontracting with people. What made the difference for me was when I actually started working with a man named Alan Weiss, and he's a consultant. He's a very well-known boutique consultant, and he's a consultant to consultants. And when I started working with him, because when I started working with Rafael was the first consultant I knew who he was making $1 million in like the 80s. And he taught me about systems and processes. He taught me about what I needed to know inside my business, because I started out as a trainer, but Rafael taught me about negotiation. He taught me about systems and helped me become a systems thinker. Mm-hmm. So he helped me with the content. He really helped me with the content, and I saw how he was conducting his business. But then when I started working with Alan, I learned about the system of business. And that's really that really changed things for me too. Mm-hmm. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning because business is changing so much.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, what was one thing, like, when you were learning about the system of business, or these kind of processes that Alan and Rafael and others were introducing to you? Like, what was like a big aha moment for you, where you're like, oh, I never thought of that? Like, what was something that, like, if you reflect back, when you
the biggest aha moment for me was when I learned about value-based pricing.
Mm-hmm. Say more, please.
Well, value-based pricing is that you charge people by the project. Mm-hmm. People say, "What's your hourly rate?" Well, I don't have an hourly rate. I'm not a therapist. Mm-hmm. But I charge people based on the value of the work that I'm doing. Yep. It's more than just the event. That's what I learned about this too. It's more than just the event. It's more than just me coming in and solving a problem. It's more than just me doing training. It's looking at what I learned from Alan is what are the ultimate results that I'm doing for my client. Yep. So it's not just, they shouldn't pay, I don't want them to pay me because I'm just doing the training. I want them to pay me for the value that I'm bringing to their organization. Yep. And that's what my business is really about, is how do I bring value. And for years, even though I didn't have a corporate background, for years almost all my work was in corporate, and then I did some government. But now I'm doing more work with nonprofits and community organizations, which I also like. Mm-hmm. But a lot of what I learned was around was corporate business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really key, and thank you for sharing that, because it's values-based pricing, results-based pricing. It's really like, what is it worth to the client to have this transformation, and kind of kicking it back, when you talk about the negotiation. And it really changes that conversation. People, hopefully potential clients are like, I see what you're saying, Simma, like, that makes sense.
Yeah, the other thing that I learned too from Alan was, if you reduce your fee, take out some of the value. Mm-hmm. So rather than saying, if you say, this project is, say, like $50,000, and they go, well, can you do it for $45,000? Then you could say, well, if we take out this piece, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But also to feel good about my value.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And and I think, like, also, you had mentioned doing work with nonprofits and community-based organizations that sometimes don't have the budget of like a Google or an Apple or someone, more established corporation. And, when you do work, if you believe in the work and you want to serve those clients as well, showing some kind of like nonprofit pricing where there's pro bono added, so that they could see like the, what your rates are and how you're able to work with them. Right. There's lots of ways of really still having your value being seen, by the clients that you're serving.
To feel good about and also to feel good about my value. One thing I see a lot of, especially like LGBT business owners who don't necessarily come from business backgrounds. I mean, some people come from business backgrounds. That's how they were raised. Their parents are business people. But other people that I see that are not from that kind of background, oftentimes I see that they don't value their value like they could.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things that I like to do when I mentor people is to help people see their value. Because I think that as LGBT people, especially people, and it doesn't matter where you are, even or how old you are, it's easy to internalize a lot of the messages that we get about self-worth. Mm-hmm. And although, we have people like Tim Cook, who's gay, we have a lot of Ellens, we have all those people, but that's not in every single area. It's not true for every single person. So I think it's really important for LGBT business owners to feel good, to understand their value, and to not internalize some of the negative messages. Because what happens is when we internalize those negative messages and we're trying to do business, then we immediately go to, well, it's this amount, but if you can't afford it, I'll do it for that amount. Mm-hmm. And that actually reduces our value. It reduces our value in our own eyes and in other people's eyes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I 100% agree with you on that. And I think it's really doing the work of deprogramming what has been, like, as you said, internalized about value and being a member of the LGBT community. I mean, having a marginalized identity and kind of what the, at least mainstream media might be telling you if you're consuming that kind of stuff. And then how do you kind of deprogram not only for yourself, and if you are a business owner, how might that be showing up in your business, and then how do you address it? And I think that's really good advice. Something that was in the bio that I read that I wanted to have you have the opportunity to share a little bit more about, and it might go again to value, is on the work of doing diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility, etc. All of the acronyms in doing this work. How, when you're working with leaders, you talk about this is more than a training. It's more than a nice to have. It's more than checking a box. How do you get leaders to see that big idea that this work is a business strategy? It is a part of business success. It is a part of the future of work. How do you walk them through that so that they can see that if they're not quite at that point of recognizing how valuable this work is?
By asking them why. Mm-hmm. Keep on drilling down why. Because, the foundation of my business, I realize this, is the foundation of my business is really about creating community. It's about creating community at work. And when I work with leaders, I just wrote about this because I also write for publication, that no matter how long people are at work, whether it's like an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, people want to feel part of something greater than themselves. And they want to feel part of a community. And so when they feel part of a community, when they feel included, that's when they're more engaged. They're more likely to collaborate. They're more likely and less afraid to share ideas that could really help the business. And when I talk to people about the business case, if they don't quite get the business case, we talk about, well, who's not being included? Who's not in your organization? Who's in your market? And oftentimes, organizations will be big on representation. They'll go, well, let's get our numbers. We got 5 black people. We got 5 Asian people. We got 5 whatever, 5 lesbians, whatever they're going to do. And then I said, well, yeah, but what are you doing with the people? Mm-hmm. And they say, well, yeah, but, look at who, we have these, we went and recruited, tech industry is really guilty of that. They really focus on numbers. And then you have all these black and brown people leaving the tech industry because nobody ever asked them for their opinion. Mm-hmm. Nobody ever asked them for ideas. So when I work with leaders, I help them see that if you are not fully including people, then it means that they are not going to work and do their best work. So if they don't do their best work, you're either A, paying them, you're not getting your return on investment. So if you're paying somebody $100,000 a year and you're not asking them for their ideas, and you're only getting $10,000 worth of work from them because they just show up, that's it, you're losing $90,000. And the other point is that if you don't utilize people, then they're either going to leave you and go to your competition, or they will start their own business and become the competition. It's such a fast rate of people of color, particularly black women, going out, leaving corporations, leaving organizations, and starting their own business because nobody's asking. There's very little. There's not enough opportunities. People aren't asking them for their ideas. People are overlooking them. People are working their biases, And people are saying, well, what am I doing here?
Yep.
I'm talented. Why am I here?
Yeah.
So-and-so wants me, or I can start my own business. So when I talked about that with leaders, that's when they get it. I mean, and then there's other pieces. They have to be. Then you have to see how willing the leaders are to change. If they if they really want to get the best out of their employees, if they really want to bring in the best people, then it means they have to transform themselves too.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge idea. I really like what you say about the work that you do, which is creating community at work and recognizing that people, they want to belong to the community. They want to feel like they have the value add. And why stop at talent acquisition? If you're like trying to diversify your pipeline, it doesn't stop there. It lives throughout. And I like that you talk about the work that you do being stitched into the DNA of the business.
If not, then it just looks good. I say, do you want to look good in the company photo, or do you really want to add some value and keep it going? Because when people say, "Oh, let's we're gonna get this black person, this brown person, this woman, this whatever," they go. And so you have you look at the organization, go, "Oh, wow, aren't we diverse?" So then nobody gets, you don't utilize the people in the organization. They don't feel included. You overlook them, so then they leave. So then next year, you get some more people, and then you take another company photo. But if you look at the company photos side by side, the same people aren't in the company photos. Maybe the white people, maybe you have some of the white people that are same in the company photos, but other people are not.
Yeah, getting to who really feels a part of this community, who feels a sense of belonging, who doesn't, and and I think that analogy of or just the example of the company photo is do you want to have a nice company photo? Do you want the optics to look nice? Or do you want to kind of leverage the differences on your team to kind of fail faster to get to that big, breakthrough, the innovation, the stuff that it will kind of set your company apart from the others? And I think most leaders know what they want, as that business success. And it takes really including all voices to get there. It's like Hidden Figures, except a better version of it. So I wanted to pivot to, you talked a bit about some of the challenges you had early on, kind of thinking about being a lesbian, being a part of the LGBT community, and can you do that in your business? And over time, you figured out, post 1994 and after, once your son was in your life, you wanted to be an outboss, and you are, and you're successful in that. And so
very much.
My question for you on that is, in thinking about if there are superpowers from our lived experiences of being a part of the rainbow family, what might be some of those superpowers that allow you as a business owner to stand out? What are some of the gifts of the journey of being LGBTQ IA plus that really allows you to kind of just own, who you are and attract the right clients to work with you and do really good work?
Well, a couple of things. One is that what I learned is how to really show up as me. And in organizations, everybody, in order to do their best work, they have to be able to show up as them. So I have to be able to show up as me. And it also helps me understand people who are afraid to show up as who they are, or who are dealing with forces that stop them. Just think about hair. People who, a lot of organizations. You still see organizations. You have people who are white who don't want to hire somebody if they don't want to hire a black person if they have dreadlocks. Or if they have cornrows, or if they have a hairstyle that is more traditionally African American, but they want them to, I've seen this happen with people I know, straighten their hair, or just wear their hair whatever the white boss wants them to wear. And I think that being a lesbian and having felt that I couldn't be myself, even though it's not exactly the same, but when you become conscious of it, if you're an LGBT person and you're at Q, if you're conscious of it, you can use what you've been through and to be able to be empathetic with other people. I mean, and especially if you're, and you to be an LGBTQ person of color. I mean, but it's important to be able to be empathetic with other people, not to be able to say, "Oh, I understand because I'm a lesbian or I'm a gay man or blah 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 blah," but to understand, I know what it feels like to not be able to be yourself, and I want to help other people be their selves.
Yes.
So, and then the other thing is to be able to be flexible and become a problem solver. Because, and this might sound weird, but when you're semi-closeted or you don't want people to know really who you are, for me, I had to come up with all these creative ways of hiding who I was.
Yeah.
But what I did learn now that I don't hide who I am, but it's also about being adaptable. Because it doesn't take anything away from me to be able to be adaptable.
Right.
Which is different than not being me, but to be able to be like different facets of me. And also, the other piece I found that when for LGBTQ people around LGBTQ issues, because there's other issues like it could be, race, ability, different kinds of issues. But if I feel really good about who I am, then, and if you're not LGBTQ and you don't know a whole lot, but if you see that I'm feeling really good about who I am, you're going to want to know more. You're going to want to know more about me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's that
you're
confidence.
Going to be more attracted to my business.
Yeah. Right.
And if you're not, you know what? I also reached the point, where people say, well, what are you about? I said, I'm about, I don't give an F. I said, because I've reached a point where I fully accept who I am, and I want to help other people fully accept who they are and also fully accept other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like, I mean, just kind of the piece that seems to really ring out in what you shared is that the empathy piece, using what you've been through and almost that it allows you to kind of have stronger empathy muscles so you can flex it and then be more empathetic to try to appreciate another person's worldview that might not exactly be the same as yours. But if their worldview is, look, I'm having a hard time working here because I feel like I can't be myself. I mean, I think for many of us, we may have had a similar experience and can relate, and I think that that's something that in particular in the work that you and I do, it's like how do we use this as a way to kind of give another story or another example so that people can get what's lost when people don't have that sense of feeling like they're a part of a team or a part of a community. And how do we change that? Because that is, like you said, when you use that example of like, if you're paying someone $100,000 and they're only able to give you 10% of their genius, wow, that's a loss for everyone. And so how do we change that? And I think the empathy piece is definitely a superpower that comes from being a part of the LGBT community. And it's something that you have in spades that you're able to kind of share with the folks that you work with. And so, yeah, you are a superhero for that.
Oh,
so,
thank you.
Yeah. So I have a few more questions for you, and I feel like we can definitely talk for a long time, but we have limited time here. So I wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity, Simma, to share with our audience, with those folks still, they're thinking about getting started in business, they have a really good idea, but there's some fear of getting started. So I'm wondering, what kind of guidance, what kind of advice would you have to offer those folks, just to be brave enough to take that first entrepreneurial step or leap?
Well, for LGBTQ, I would say talk to other people, get a mentor, and if you are, and if being like gay, queer, LGBTQI, you know what I'm talking about. Start Out's a really good organization. I was on the planning board of Start Out, which is the LGBTQI++ and friends, entrepreneurs, small businesses, and startups. And I think that that's really helpful.
I love that.
Because I mean, especially, if you're looking at that and how do I deal with this issue? Now, if it's just business. I mean, it's good to be able to talk to other LGBTQ startups, small businesses, and entrepreneurs, and then also go. You know, you don't have to stay in the community either. You can go. I mean, like my first mentors, most of my mentors haven't been. They've been straight, but they've been very, you know, they've been accepting of who I am, and I accept who they are. And actually, people always say that they learn a lot from working with me because there's stuff that they didn't know, and I'm open to talking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, just the mentorship piece and the fact that, I mean, the beauty of Start Out, and I'm so grateful that you mentioned that particular organization, is that, yes, there are chapters where people are meeting in person. It's also, you know, if you're tuning into the show and, I mean, you're in another country, I mean, you can still access a lot of the resources that are available online through their platform, their networking platform. So it's a really valuable resource. If you're wanting to get started in business and you're LGBT, wow. Like, I mean, talk about another superpower that we have, which is community. And so many of us, like, if we learn that someone is trying to start a business, they're LGBT, it's like, I mean, my instinct is to give. It's like, please join, you know, please, like, here's all these resources that I know of, and sharing and trying to, you know, have that rising tide that supports so many of us. So I think that's really great advice. And so we are approaching the end of our conversation. So one thing I definitely want you to mention is your podcast. So here's an audience here who loves listening to podcasts. So could you talk to us a little bit about what your podcast is, what it's about, and where people can find it?
Yes, and it's my startup venture too. My podcast is Everyday Conversations on Race for Everyday People. It's a cross-race conversation on race to bring people together across race to have conversations about race to show that we can do that. And it's because I saw that people are afraid to talk about race. White people are afraid to talk about race because they're afraid of being attacked for saying the wrong thing. And people of color don't want to talk about race because they know what it's, because they get trivialized or ignored or being told, oh, so what? You know, let's not talk about that, or don't be emotional. So I decided, but I also knew that, because I'll talk to anybody about race. And I always do. And I knew that I felt like I had a responsibility to bring people together across race to have that conversation, because people need to be able to get to know each other and understand each other's perspectives and learn so that we could be inclusive together and stop racism together. My goal, the podcast, is I want to be able to eliminate fear of differences, stop hate, and spread love across the globe. So if people would like to listen to my podcast, it is at www.raceconvo like conversation, www.raceconvo.com is the website for my podcast. And if they would like to be a guest, contact me, or would like to hear a topic, contact me. And that's not my regular website, but that's my podcast website.
And your regular website, where can people find you and learn more about your work?
It's www.Simma, Simma, Lieberman, Lieberman.com, www.simmalieberman.com, and you can find all my social media information on the site also.
Yes, that's awesome. And I love your podcast because it feels almost full circle. You know, when you were talking about getting started in the world of work, you were working at a multicultural organization in New York where you were having conversations about race, right? And this is when you were living in the Bronx. And so it just seems like it's well suited. You know, it's territory, like you said, that you love talking about race, you know, and that you're not afraid to talk about it with anyone. And I think that's the best thing on anything that feels risky or vulnerable. You know, if we can share our truth and open up a space for dialogue, that's where we connect, right? And so I'm really grateful that you have that podcast out there. I'm excited to be on the show soon, so looking forward to that. And I think it's going to be awesome because I love conversations with you. And just thank you. Thank you for being on the show and sharing a little bit about your experiences, being a business owner, being LGBT, the magic that happens when those two things intersect. And and I think, you know, we should continue the conversation. So bringing you back on the show in a year or so, and just talking about, what's changing, and, maybe talking about more of what we're seeing in the space could be really interesting, and maybe having some kind of panel discussion with other folks that we know could be a lot of fun. Yeah. So anyway, this was fun. Thank you. And so for folks who've tuned in, you know the drill. If you want to text OutBoss, all one word, to 33777, you will get show notes from today. You'll get all that information that Simma shared about where to find her online, where to learn more about her podcast. We've got a listener survey, so you can let me know what you'd like to see changed on the show for the future. And just remember, the show comes out every Tuesday morning. So if you're loving the conversations, you want to keep listening, that's one piece of feedback that I received is people wanted to know, when does the show come out? When's the next episode? Every Tuesday morning. So save that wherever you consume podcasts. And as always, keep being your authentic selves 100% of the time. And I'll talk with you next Tuesday. Bye.